I thought the rain that shattered my spine had been random. That's what everyone told me for 3 years. A wet highway, bad visibility, a tragic collision. But the letter waiting beside my wedding dress told a different story. Not from a stranger, not from the police, from my own husband. The same man who kissed my forehead beside a hospital bed while machines breathed for me had already signed paperwork dividing my estate before I even woke up. And suddenly, the accident that ruined my body stopped feeling accidental at all.
Rain changes the sound of memory. Some nights I still wake up hearing tires glide across water like whispers over glass. Not the crash itself, just the moments before it. The silence. The windshield wipers struggling against the storm. The low jazz station I always played when I drove alone at night. I remember that part clearly. Too clearly. I had left my father's charity dinner early because my heels were killing me and my husband, Ian, insisted he would handle the networking. That was his phrase for everything back then. I'll handle it. The investors, the lawyers, the family disputes. Especially me. At 34, I thought that kind of confidence meant safety. Now I know control and safety are not the same thing. The highway outside Chicago looked almost silver beneath the rain, empty except for scattered headlights drifting through the darkness. I remember rubbing my left shoulder at a red light. I remember checking my phone. One missed call from my younger sister, Hera. No voicemail. Then the light turned green. That should have been the end of the memory. But lately pieces have started returning in strange places. Like broken glass surfacing through water. A smell. A sentence. A reflection in a mirror. 3 weeks ago, while folding laundry, I suddenly remembered a black SUV behind me. Not passing. Following close enough that its headlights swallowed my rearview mirror. The memory hit so hard I dropped an entire basket onto the floor. My caregiver, Leena, thought I was having another pain episode. I let her believe that. It was easier than explaining that my own mind had started betraying me in fragments. Recovery teaches you humiliations nobody warns you about. People imagine the dramatic parts. The surgery. The wheelchair. The hospital monitors. But they never talk about the quieter humiliations. The way nurses stop speaking to you directly after a while and start talking around you instead. The way relatives lower their voices like disability is contagious. The way your own body becomes a negotiation. For almost a year, I couldn't shower without assistance. Couldn't climb stairs. Couldn't hold a coffee mug steady on bad mornings. My legs recovered enough for movement eventually, but not enough to restore the life I had before. The doctors called it a remarkable outcome. I called it surviving halfway. When I finally returned home after rehabilitation, the penthouse no longer felt like mine. Ian had redesigned everything while I was gone. The darker walls. The minimalist furniture. The scent was different. Sandalwood instead of jasmine. I rolled my wheelchair through rooms that looked staged for strangers. You needed a fresh environment, he told me gently. He said everything gently back then. Like a man constantly speaking beside a sleeping child. At first, I mistook that softness for devotion. Now I replay those conversations differently. Carefully. Suspiciously. Because people hiding something often become excessively patient. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was dependence. I had built my own architecture firm from a rented one-room office over 12 exhausting years. I negotiated contracts with men who dismissed me before meetings even started. I survived bankruptcy threats during the recession. I worked through migraines and pneumonia and grief after my mother died. Then suddenly, I needed permission to leave my own apartment. Ion handled the finances while I recovered. The medications. The insurance. The legal paperwork. Every document arrived through him first. At the time, I was too exhausted to question it. Trauma makes surrender feel reasonable. Sometimes I think the memory loss saved me. Because if I had remembered everything immediately, I might not have survived the truth. The neurologist explained that traumatic amnesia isn't uncommon after severe impact injuries. The brain protects itself, she said. I hated that sentence. Protection shouldn't feel this empty. There was a hole inside my life where the collision lived. And everyone around me behaved as if I should stop trying to look inside it. Especially Ion. Whenever I mentioned the crash, his entire posture changed almost invisibly. His jaw tightened. His attention sharpened. Like a man waiting for an alarm to go off. You need peace, Leena, he'd tell me quietly. Obsessing over missing memories will destroy your recovery. Maybe he was right. Because eventually I stopped asking questions out loud. I just started noticing things instead. The first crack appeared 2 years after the accident. Small, almost forgettable. I was searching through storage boxes in the guest room when I found an envelope addressed in Ion's handwriting. No stamp. No mailing label. Just my name. Leena. Inside was a hospital payment receipt dated 4 days after my surgery. Attached to it was a settlement document. I remember staring at the number for almost a full minute. $2,400,000. Paid privately. Closed without litigation. No details attached. Only one line stood out. Authorized family representative. Signed by my husband. I confronted him that night while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Funny how storms always seem to arrive before bad truths. Ion barely looked up from his wine glass. It was insurance-related, he said calmly. You were heavily medicated. I handled it for you. What settlement? Leena. He sighed like I was exhausting him. Not everything is a conspiracy. That word stayed with me. Conspiracy. People only use that word when they're trying to make curiosity sound irrational. After that, I started paying attention differently. I noticed how quickly he changed subjects whenever certain names came up. The attorney. The insurance company. The driver who supposedly fled the scene. I noticed he still took private phone calls on the balcony at night. I noticed he kept paper files locked inside his office instead of digitizing them like everyone else. Most importantly, I noticed fear. Not mine. His. Very controlled, very hidden. But there. Like smoke trapped behind glass. 3 months later, Hira came to visit. My younger sister had always moved through life like sunlight, beautiful, warm, careless with consequences. Even as children, people forgave her things they punished me for. She arrived wearing an oversized cream coat and carrying expensive pastries she never remembered I disliked. Still raining in this city, she laughed while shaking water from her umbrella. But the moment she looked at me, the smile faded slightly. Not pity. Something stranger. Discomfort. Like she was checking whether I recognized her from somewhere. She hoped I didn't. That feeling stayed with me the entire evening, especially when Ayan entered the room, because something passed between them. Passed. Practiced. Most people wouldn't notice it, but trauma turns observation into instinct. A glance too quick to explain. A hesitation too familiar. A silence with history inside it. That night I couldn't sleep. The apartment hummed softly with distant thunder while city lights flickered across the ceiling. Around 2 a.m. I wheeled myself toward the kitchen for water. As I passed Ayan's office, I heard Hira crying. Very softly. And his voice. Low. Controlled and... You can't fall apart now. A pause. Then her whisper. She remembers things sometimes. The glass nearly slipped from my hand. Everything inside me went still. I should have entered the room immediately. Demanded answers. Forced the truth into the open. But fear does strange things when betrayal first introduces itself. It doesn't explode. It freezes. So I stayed hidden in the dark hallway, listening to my husband comfort my sister in a voice I no longer recognized. And for the first time since the accident, I began wondering if the missing part of my memory was missing for a reason. The next morning, nobody mentioned the conversation. Hera smiled over breakfast like nothing had happened. Ayan kissed my forehead before taking a business call. The city outside glittered beneath fresh sunlight. Normal. Beautiful. Carefully staged. But underneath that polished surface, something had already started moving. Quietly. Deliberately. And deep down, I think they knew it. Because from that moment on, they started watching me differently too. After the hallway conversation, everything changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways anyone else would notice. That's what made it frightening. Because real manipulation rarely arrives loudly. It arrives through adjustments. Tiny recalculations. Like furniture moved half an inch overnight. Ayan became even kinder. That was the first thing I noticed. Too kind. Too attentive. He started bringing me tea before I asked for it, scheduling wellness outings, ordering orthopedic equipment I never requested. Every gesture looked loving from the outside. But underneath it, I felt management. Like he wasn't caring for me anymore. He was maintaining something. 3 days after overhearing him and Hira, I tested him. Carefully. At breakfast, I mentioned a false memory. I think I remembered part of the crash, I said casually while spreading jam across toast. His hand stopped for less than a second. Then resumed. What part? Other driver. I watched his eyes closely. No panic. That would have been easier. Instead, he leaned back slowly. Interested. Measured them. What about them? I remembered a red truck. There had been no truck. At least not in the fragments returning to me. But I wanted to see whether he corrected me. He didn't. He simply nodded once. That makes sense. No details. No questions. Just agreement. That was the moment my fear became certainty. Because innocent people search for truth. Controlled people search for stability. That afternoon, I went into his office for the first time in months. Not openly. I waited until he left for a charity board meeting. Leena was downstairs collecting prescriptions. The apartment was quiet except for rain brushing softly against the windows again. Always rain. I used to love storms before the accident. Now every thunderclap felt personal. Ion's office smelled like cedar wood and printer ink. Perfectly organized. Too organized. Men hiding secrets often become obsessive about visible order. I searched carefully. Desk drawers first. Nothing suspicious. Financial reports. Contracts. Meeting schedules. Then the filing cabinet. Locked. Of course. But illness teaches patience. People underestimate disabled women constantly. They assume dependence means helplessness. They stop imagining you're capable of planning. Observing up. Preparing. 3 weeks earlier, I had watched him unlock the cabinet while standing behind him during a phone call. 4 digits. Slow muscle memory. I still remembered the rhythm. The cabinet clicked open immediately. And suddenly, my entire life changed shape. Inside were folders labeled with dates from the year of the accident. Insurance correspondence. Hospital documents. Legal records. And one thin black folder with no label at all. That one scared me most. Because unlabeled things are rarely innocent. My hands actually trembled pulling it out. Not from weakness. From instinct. Inside were photographs. My car after the collision. Crushed driver's side frame. Shattered windshield. Rainwater reflecting emergency lights. I forced myself to keep looking. Then I found the image that stopped my breathing. A black SUV. Parked 200 feet behind the wreck. Undamaged. Waiting. I knew that vehicle. I'd seen it before. Not on the highway. At our apartment garage. At charity events. Outside Ion's office building. The same SUV. The same license plate. Registered to one of his private security contractors. I sat there frozen while rain streaked the office windows beside me. Not because I finally had proof something was wrong, but because my body had recognized danger before my mind did. That's the terrifying thing about betrayal. Sometimes your nervous system understands long before your logic catches up. Then I heard the apartment door open. Too early. My chest tightened instantly. Ion's voice drifted from the hallway. Leena? I shoved the folder back into the cabinet so quickly papers bent at the corners. Locked it. Breathed once. Twice. Then wheeled backward just as he appeared in the doorway. For one terrible second, neither of us spoke. His eyes moved from me to the cabinet, then back again. Smiling. Always smiling. Looking for something? His tone was gentle, but something cold slid beneath it. I forced a laugh. I was searching for the property tax file. You should have asked me. I didn't want to interrupt your meeting. A pause. Then he stepped forward and crouched beside my wheelchair. His hand rested lightly on mine. Warm. Steady. I don't want you stressing yourself with paperwork anymore. There it was again. Not concern. Containment. That night, I barely touched dinner. Hera arrived unexpectedly around 8 carrying flowers nobody had asked for. White orchids, my mother's favorite. The cruelty of certain details is almost artistic. She kissed my cheek carefully, avoiding direct eye contact. I poured wine for everyone except me. You're still on medication, he reminded softly. I wasn't. He knew I wasn't. But Hira didn't correct him either. The lie floated there casually between us. A tiny demonstration of control. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. They had been rewriting my reality for years in ways so subtle I almost missed them. Dinner stretched painfully long. Their conversation sounded rehearsed. Safe topics: travel, business, family gossip. But underneath it, tension kept leaking through small fractures. Hera kept glancing toward Ayan before answering questions. Ayan interrupted her constantly without seeming rude. And every few minutes, both of them looked at me. Check-in. Monitoring. Like people sitting beside unstable explosives. Then something happened. I still replay sometimes. Near dessert, Hera accidentally knocked over her wine glass. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth instantly. Sharp. Violent. For a split second. I remembered blood on rainwater. Twisted metal. A horn screaming endlessly somewhere in the dark. And a voice. Male. Calm out. She's still breathing. The memory hit so violently my hands locked around the edge of the table. I unnoticed immediately. Leena. I couldn't answer. More flashes came rapidly now. Rain against broken glass. Headlights. The smell of gasoline. Then another sentence. One I knew I had heard before. Finish it before someone stops us. My breathing turned shallow. The room tilted. Hera stood abruptly. We should call someone. No. I snapped it harder than intended. Silence crashed over the table. Because that was the first genuinely forceful thing I had said in years. Ayan studied me carefully now. Not like a husband. Like a problem evolving unexpectedly. I just need air, I whispered. Then I wheeled myself toward the balcony before either of them could stop me. Cold wind hit my face immediately. Downtown lights blurred through the rain below. My hands shook against the armrests. Not from weakness. From memory. Because suddenly I knew something with terrifying certainty. The crash had not ended on impact. Someone had approached the car afterward. Someone had spoken. And whoever that man was, I knew his voice. The balcony door slid open behind me. I stepped outside quietly. No anger. No confrontation. That would have revealed too much. Instead, he draped a blanket gently across my shoulders like the perfect husband again. You're pushing yourself too hard. I stared out at the storm. Do you ever think about that night? A dangerous question. I felt him hesitate beside me. Every day. Do you remember seeing anyone else there? Too direct. His answer came carefully now. Not fast. Not emotional. Calculated. I turned slightly toward him. What if my memories start coming back? Lightning flashed across the skyline. For one brief second, his expression lost control. Fear. Real fear. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it. And once you see genuine fear in someone, you can never unsee it. He recovered with a soft smile. Then maybe you'll finally have peace. Peace. Again that word. As if forgetting was healthier for everyone involved. Later that night, after they both went to sleep, I stayed awake in the living room with the city glowing silently beyond the windows. I replayed every recovered fragment carefully. The SUV, the voice, the hallway conversation, the settlement papers. None of it proved the full truth yet. But together, they formed the outline of something monstrous. And the worst part? I still didn't know who I could trust. Not my husband. Not my sister. Maybe not even my own memory. Around 3 a.m., I made a decision that terrified me more than the accident itself. I opened my laptop, created a hidden email account, and sent one message to the attorney whose name appeared on the settlement file. Just 7 words. I remember more than they realize. Then I waited. Heart pounding. Rain falling softly against the glass. Wondering whether I had just taken back control of my life. Or signed my own death warrant. I didn't sleep after sending the email. I sat in darkness, watching the skyline fade from black to gray while the apartment slowly woke around me. Coffee machines humming in neighboring units. Elevators groaning through the walls. Rain finally weakening into mist. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. The kind that make you question your own instincts. Because paranoia and survival can feel dangerously similar in the early stages. At 6:12 a.m., my hidden inbox received a reply. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. You should not be asking questions through unsecured channels. My stomach tightened instantly. Not denial. Not confusion. Warning. I read it 3 times before deleting the account entirely. Then I sat motionless for almost 10 minutes listening to my own breathing. Because now I knew something for certain. The attorney remembered me. And he was afraid, too. Ion found me in the living room shortly after sunrise. He looked freshly showered, perfectly composed, wearing one of those charcoal suits tailored so sharply they made everyone else in a room appear unfinished. You're awake early. I closed the laptop calmly. Couldn't sleep. He studied me for a second longer than usual. Then smiled. There's a rehabilitation fundraiser tonight. I'd like you to come. The request sounded harmless. Supportive even, but immediately my instincts reacted. Why now? For nearly a year he had gently discouraged public appearances whenever my pain levels worsened. Now suddenly he wanted visibility. Exposure. An audience. I'm tired, I said carefully. It would be good for people to see you. That sentence landed strangely. Not see me. See that I was alive. By noon, the rain had disappeared completely, leaving the city washed clean beneath pale sunlight. Hera stayed unusually quiet all morning. She hovered around the kitchen, pretending to scroll through her phone while barely touching her breakfast. Every now and then, she looked toward me like she wanted to confess something. Then fear would shut her down again. I recognized that kind of fear. The kind built slowly over time. The kind that trains people to survive by obedience. Around 2 o'clock, I heard raised voices from the hallway outside Ion's office. Muted. Tense. I moved closer silently. not difficult in a wheelchair. People rarely expect quiet movement from someone they underestimate. Hira sounded panicked. You said she remembered nothing. She doesn't, Ayan replied sharply. She's asking questions. That doesn't mean anything. A pause. Then Hira whispered something that made my blood run cold. What if she remembers the bridge? Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Then his voice again. Lower now. Control the... She won't. The bridge. Not highway. Not crash site. Bridge. Another missing piece. I moved away before they could notice me listening. My pulse hammered painfully against my ribs. Because suddenly new fragments started surfacing again. Dark water below guardrails. Rain hammering metal. A sharp turn. And headlights behind me moving too fast. Not accident. Pursuit. That evening I agreed to attend the fundraiser. Not because I trusted him. Because frightened people reveal more in public than private. Especially when they believe appearances still protect them. Leena helped me dress while sunset burned gold against the windows. I chose a deep navy gown with long sleeves that concealed the scars running along my shoulder and spine. For years, I hid those scars from everyone. Tonight, I wanted them visible. Not physically. Emotionally. I wanted people to see what survival actually costs. When Ayan saw me emerge from the bedroom, something flickered across his face. Not affection. Assessment. Like he was recalculating probabilities. You look beautiful, he said softly. I smiled politely. So do you. That almost made him uneasy. Because emotionally controlled people become dangerous when they stop sounding wounded. The fundraiser occupied the rooftop ballroom of a luxury hotel overlooking the river. Glass walls. Soft piano music. Waiters moving through clusters of wealthy donors balancing champagne glasses and carefully rehearsed compassion. The room smelled like perfume, polished wood, and money. Always money. Ayan thrived in environments like this. He moved naturally through conversations, touching shoulders lightly, remembering names, making people feel important. Watching him work a room was like watching someone conduct an orchestra only he could hear. And for years, I mistook charisma for goodness. The moment we entered, attention shifted toward me. Not subtle. People stared at, some with sympathy, others with fascination. Because tragedy becomes social currency among wealthy people. My survival had become part of Ayan's mythology. The devoted husband. The resilient wife. The miraculous recovery. Everyone loves stories that make suffering look elegant. Then I noticed something strange. Several people looked genuinely shocked to see me standing. Not emotional. Alarmed. Tiny reactions quickly hidden behind polite smiles. But visible if you were watching closely enough. And now, I watched everything. An older man approached us near the champagne tower. Silver hair. Expensive watch. Nervous eyes. Leena, he said slowly. You look well. I recognized him immediately from the settlement documents. Martin Feld. One of the estate attorneys. His handshake trembled slightly against mine. Interesting. Ayan stepped in almost instantly. Martin was invaluable after the accident. Of course he was. The attorney avoided direct eye contact with me after that. Another detail worth remembering. As the night continued, I began noticing patterns. Whenever I approached certain conversations, they ended abruptly. Whenever I mentioned rehabilitation timelines, people exchanged glances. Not everyone. Just specific circle around Diane. And suddenly the horrifying possibility formed clearly in my mind. More people knew. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough. Enough to protect themselves. Enough to stay silent. Around 9:30, I excused myself toward the restroom corridor, mostly to breathe. The ballroom had started feeling airless despite the music and lights. As I passed the service hallway behind the kitchen, someone grabbed my wheelchair. Hard. I jerked around instantly. It was Martin Feld. The attorney. His face looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "Need to leave," he whispered urgently. My pulse spiked. "Why?" "They didn't expect your memory to recover this much." He glanced toward the ballroom nervously, then leaned closer. "The crash wasn't supposed to happen that way." Every muscle in my body went cold. "What does that mean?" But before he could answer, another voice interrupted behind us. Martin. Ayan. Standing at the end of the hallway. Perfectly calm. But his eyes, those eyes were lethal now. Martin released the wheelchair immediately. "I was just checking if she needed assistance." Ayan smiled. "That's thoughtful of you." No shouting. No accusations. That made it worse. Because truly dangerous people rarely lose emotional control publicly. They simply make consequences understood. Martin backed away quickly, almost escaping. And just like that, I knew two things. The attorney was terrified of Ayan. And whatever happened the night of the crash, it involved more than one person. Ayan walked toward me slowly after Martin disappeared. "You seem overwhelmed tonight." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Neither did he. Not up close. Tiny fractures had started appearing beneath his polished exterior. Tension around the mouth. Fatigue behind the eyes. Pressure. Good. Pressure makes careful people sloppy. "I was asking Martin about the settlement," I said evenly. His gaze sharpened instantly. "What settlement?" Interesting. He knew exactly which settlement. But he wanted to hear how much I knew. "The private one." A long pause. Then another soft smile. "Legal matters after catastrophic injuries become complicated." There's that word again. What word? Complicated. For the first time all night. He looked irritated. Only briefly. But enough. "You're exhausting yourself chasing fragmented memories." Maybe fragmented memories are safer than complete lies. That landed and I saw it. The tiny tightening in his jaw. The calculation returning. Then suddenly, music stopped inside the ballroom. A microphone squealed softly. One of the event coordinators stepped onto the stage smiling brightly. "We'd like to invite Ayan and Leena Rahman to say a few words about resilience and recovery." Applause spread across the room. Warm, oblivious. I looked at Ayan and instantly understood. This wasn't spontaneous. He planned this. He wanted me visible tonight for a reason. But why? He extended his hand toward my wheelchair gently. Ready? The terrifying part? He sounded sincere. That's the thing nobody explains about manipulation. The emotions can still feel real, even when the intentions are poisoned. As we moved toward the stage, hundreds of eyes followed us through the ballroom lights. The river shimmered black beyond the glass walls. Cameras lifted. Phones recording. A perfect public moment. Then Ayan leaned down beside me and whispered something that turned the blood in my veins to ice. You should be careful what memories you recover. I looked up at him slowly. His smile never moved. But underneath it, the mask was finally slipping. And for the first time since the accident, I truly believed my husband might be capable of killing me. The applause kept going while my heart turned cold inside my chest. Ayan stood beside me beneath the ballroom lights, smiling for photographs while guests lifted champagne glasses toward us like we were some inspirational success story. The devoted husband. The recovering wife. The beautiful lie. And all I could hear was his whisper repeating inside my head. You should be careful what memories you recover. I used to think threats sounded sharp. Obvious. Violent. But the most dangerous threats arrived politely. Wrapped in concern. Delivered with a smile. The coordinator handed Ayan the microphone first. Of course she did. Men like him always speak first. He thanked donors gracefully, spoke about resilience, recovery, gratitude. The room adored him. You could feel it. People trust calm men in expensive suits, especially when those men know exactly how to perform tenderness in public. Then he turned toward me. Leena has taught me what true strength looks like. Applause again. I almost admired the precision of it. Because every word sounded loving, while quietly reinforcing the same image he had spent years constructing. Fragile wife. Protective husband. Controlled narrative. He handed me the microphone gently. The ballroom softened into silence. Hundreds of eyes waiting. Phones recording. And suddenly, I realized this was exactly the kind of moment he depended on. Public pressure. Emotional expectation. A woman too polite to disrupt the atmosphere. Too damaged to challenge him openly. For years. That version of me probably existed. Not anymore. I adjusted the microphone slowly. Bought myself time. Then smiled. I actually want to thank my husband tonight, I said softly. Relief flickered across his face. But visible. The audience leaned in warmly. Safe again. Predictable again. Then I continued. Because if not for Ayan, I never would have found the letter. Silence. Subtle at first. But I felt his body go still beside me. Just slightly. Enough. I reached into my purse carefully and removed the folded cream envelope I had hidden there for weeks. The wedding letter. The one I was never supposed to see. Rain started tapping faintly against the ballroom glass again as if the universe itself enjoyed dramatic timing. I found this inside a storage box beneath our guest room floorboards, I continued calmly. It was written 3 days before our wedding. Now confusion spread quietly across the crowd. People exchanged glances. Ian's smile remained perfect. Too perfect? That's private, Leena, he said lightly. Not angry. Not yet. I looked at him. Then why hide it? There it was. The first crack. I unfolded the letter slowly while the room held its breath. My hands were steady now. Completely steady? Because fear changes once truth finally takes shape. It stops being panic and becomes clarity. I almost didn't recognize your handwriting, I said softly into the microphone. But then I remembered. I looked directly at him. You always press too hard with fountain pens when you were nervous. The audience laughed nervously, not understanding yet. Good. Let them lean closer. Then I read the line that changed everything. Once the accident is finalized, everything transfers cleanly. The marriage protects the transition period. The room froze. Not dramatically. Worse. Quietly. Like oxygen had slowly disappeared. Ian moved immediately. Smooth. Controlled. He stepped closer and lowered his voice just enough to sound protective instead of threatening. You're confused. Classic. Not denial. Destabilization. The oldest strategy in the world. Make the woman sound unreliable. Especially the disabled woman. Especially the traumatized woman. I smiled faintly. No, I said into the microphone. I was confused 3 years ago. Murmurs spread across the ballroom now. Uneasy. Restless. People no longer looked inspired. Now they looked curious. Dangerously curious. And curiosity is lethal to controlled narratives. Ian tried again. Gentler this time. Leena, this isn't the place. That's interesting, I replied calmly. Because you spent years deciding exactly where my place should be. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Good. Discomfort means illusion is weakening. Then Hira appeared near the front of the stage. Pale. Panicked. I hadn't even noticed her enter the ballroom again. Her eyes locked onto the letter instantly. And in that moment, I knew she recognized it too. Not because she wrote it, because she had seen it before. Ian, she whispered sharply. That single whisper exposed more than any confession could have. Because it carried familiarity. Shared history. Here. He ignored her completely. Still focused on me. Always control the primary threat first. I think you should stop talking, he said quietly. The audience probably heard concern. I heard calculation. I folded the letter again carefully. Then looked out across the ballroom. At some point after trauma, I said softly, you realize people stop seeing you as a person. No one moved. They start seeing you as an arrangement. I glanced toward Ian. A responsibility. Oh, Hira! A complication. Then back to the crowd. Or an opportunity. The room had become completely silent now except for rain against glass and the distant hum of the city below us. I lost my memory after the accident, I continued. But other people lost something too. I let the pause stretch. Their patience. Ian finally reached for the microphone. Not aggressively. Carefully. But I pulled it back first. And for the first time in years, I saw genuine anger break through his composure. Fast, sharp, gone again almost instantly. But too late. I saw it. And now others had too. Then I said the sentence I had rehearsed alone in my head for 14 sleepless nights. The crash was not an accident. The ballroom erupted immediately. Questions, voices, movement. Someone dropped the champagne glass. I grabbed my wheelchair handles hard enough to hurt. Not visibly. Strategically. His smile remained fixed while his fingers dug into metal behind me. You're having an episode, he said calmly to the crowd. There it was. The final weapon. Her mind is unstable. Her memory is unreliable. She's emotional. Broken women are easy to discredit. Society trains people for that. But before he could keep speaking, another voice interrupted from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Martin felt the attorney, standing pale beneath the ballroom lights, breathing hard, terrified, but finally moving anyway. This isn't confusion, he said. I released the wheelchair instantly. The room shifted. Completely. Because now it wasn't just me. Martin stepped forward slowly. There was a financial arrangement after the collision. Shock spread visibly now. Guests whispering. Phones lifting again. Ion's mask didn't crack this time. It disappeared. Not explosively. Coldly. His face became something flatter. More dangerous. Like a man finally tired of pretending to be human. You should leave, Martin, he said quietly. Martin ignored him. Good. Fear had finally lost to guilt. The original police report was altered, Martin continued. There were investors involved in a pending estate merger. Her death would have transferred controlling authority temporarily through marriage. The room exploded into noise again. And suddenly all those fragmented memories inside me stopped floating separately. They connected. Crash! The settlement. The secrecy. The pressure to remain dependent. Not random pieces. A system. A carefully managed transition of power. Built around the assumption that I would never fully recover. Hera started crying softly near the stage. Not dramatic sobbing. Something smaller. Ugly. Human. And suddenly I realized something unexpected. She had never been fully in control either. Just weaker. More willing to stay silent. Then Ion did something terrifying. He laughed. Softly, almost under his breath. The room slowly quieted again. Because calmness during chaos unsettles people more than screaming ever could. He looked at me for a very long time before speaking. And when he finally did, his voice sounded almost relieved. Not accusation. Not panic. Recognition. Like a game reaching its final move. I felt cold all over suddenly. Because in that moment, I understood something horrifying. He hadn't spent years afraid I would remember. He had spent years preparing for the day I did. And judging by the expression on his face, this confrontation was unfolding far too calmly for a man who had just lost control. Which meant only one thing. He still believed he could win. The room was still loud. But in my head, everything went quiet. Because that look on Ion's face wasn't panic. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation. Like a man adjusting a plan. Not losing one. And that was the moment I understood something dangerous. I had spent years preparing to expose him. But he had spent years preparing for my return. I didn't react immediately. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't cry. Because the worst thing you can do with controlling people is let them measure your emotions in real time. Instead, I smiled. Small. Measured. Then looked directly at him beneath the ballroom lights. Go ahead, I said softly. Tell them the rest. The guests shifted uneasily around us. Phones half lowered now. Nobody knew whether they were witnessing a scandal or something criminal. Ion inhaled slowly. Steady. Then he surprised me. He didn't deny the letter. Didn't deny the settlement. Didn't deny the altered report. He stepped forward calmly and addressed the room like a man presenting quarterly projections. This, he said carefully, gesturing toward me, is exactly why certain decisions were made privately. Murmurs spread immediately. Confusion. Curiosity. Hera grabbed his arm. And stop. He removed her hand without even looking at her. The truth, he continued, is more complicated than emotional fragments. There it was again. Complicated. His favorite word. The word people use when they need morality to sound negotiable. He turned toward the guests fully. After years beside him, I recognized the performance immediately. Controlled pacing. Measured pauses. Direct eye contact. The voice he used during investor negotiations. You were never expected to survive the extent of those injuries, he said calmly. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Not because of the sentence itself. Because of how casually he delivered it. Like discussing weather patterns. But when she did survive, he continued, everything became unstable. Unstable. Another strategic word. Not evil. Not criminal. Just inconvenient. I stayed silent. Let him keep building his version. After the collision, he said, there were financial threats tied to pending estate structures, corporate liabilities, and external investors. Always money. Always structure. Always language designed to sound cleaner than reality. So yes, he admitted smoothly, certain legal actions were taken under emergency advisement. Martin shook his head immediately. That's not what happened. But Ion ignored him. Because controlling the room mattered more than controlling facts now. To protect her assets, he continued. Not her. Her assets. The distinction mattered. Temporary death documentation was processed until her long-term prognosis became clearer. The room erupted again. People whispering harder now. Someone near the back muttered, Jesus Christ. But the terrifying part? Some guests actually looked uncertain. Not horrified. Uncertain. Because confidence manipulates perception better than truth does. And Ion knew it. Then someone asked the question hanging over the entire ballroom. And you married her sister? The room turned toward Hera instantly. Poor Hera. For the first time all night, She looked truly trapped. Ian answered without hesitation. Yes. Another wave of shock. But not for romance, he added quickly. For continuity. I almost laughed. Continuity? As if human beings were corporate departments. It ensured protection of family holdings during instability. Then finally, he looked toward Hira. Briefly. Coldly. It was never personal. That line destroyed her. I watched it happen in real time. Because suddenly she understood something I had known much longer. She was never chosen. Only useful. A replacement. Temporary emotional architecture built to stabilize appearances. And the tragedy? I think part of her really loved him. She stepped backward slowly, tears gathering silently. Said you loved me. Ian barely reacted. This is not the time. No denial. No comfort. Nothing. Because once manipulative people lose strategic use for tenderness, they withdraw it instantly. And everyone in that ballroom saw it. Good. Let them finally see him without the performance. That's when I moved. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Precisely. I was conscious after the crash. The sentence cut through the noise instantly. Every face turned toward me again. I held Ian's gaze the entire time. I heard voices outside the car. Silence spread slowly. Heavy. Watching. I heard someone say, I swallowed once. She's still breathing. Ian's jaw tightened slightly. Barely visible. But there. I also heard another sentence. I paused deliberately. Because timing matters when truth finally lands. Finish it before someone stops us. The ballroom froze. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. Hira looked physically ill now. Martin closed his eyes briefly like a man reliving his own guilt. But Ian? Still calm. Still calculating. You're reconstructing trauma emotionally, he said carefully. False memory formation after catastrophic injury is extremely common. There it was. The final strategy? Medicalize truth. Turn memory into instability. I expected it. Prepared for it. Which is why I reached slowly into my purse again. And removed my phone. I thought you might say that. I tapped the screen once. Then placed the phone beside the microphone. At first, only static filled the ballroom speakers. Then his voice emerged. Clear. Sharp. Undeniable. The paperwork is already approved. Once the transfer clears, nobody questions the timeline. The room went dead silent. A second voice entered the recording. Martin's. And if she wakes up? Then Ian again. Cold. Controlled. She won't remember enough to matter. The sound echoed through the ballroom like breaking glass. Hira covered her mouth instantly. Several guests stepped backward. One woman whispered, "Oh my God!" And finally, Ian looked shaken. Only slightly. But enough. Because recordings don't bleed emotionally. They don't panic. They don't exaggerate. They simply exist. He stared at me for a long moment. Then something changed in his expression completely. Not anger. Something darker. Acceptance. Like a man realizing the battlefield had finally become visible to everyone else. "You planned this carefully," he said quietly. I tilted my head slightly. "I learned from you." A pause settled between us. Heavy. Private despite the crowd around us. Then he leaned closer. Just enough that only I could hear the next sentence. "Still don't understand what happened that night." My pulse slowed instantly. Because that wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Before I could answer, he turned back toward the guests again. Still composed somehow. Still dangerous. "Ask yourself something," he said calmly. And immediately I knew what he was doing. Reversal. If she was alive this entire time... He let the pause stretch. Where was she? The room shifted again. Subtly. But I felt it. Doubt moving through people like smoke. "Why disappear for years?" he continued. "Why return publicly only now?" Phones lowered slightly. Eyes moved toward me again. Suspicion is terrifyingly easy to redirect. And Ayan understood human perception better than anyone I'd ever known. Because facts alone are fragile. Narratives survive longer. I didn't answer immediately. Rushed truth sounds defensive. Defensive truth sounds guilty. So I let silence breathe. Let them wonder. Then finally spoke. "I stayed alive," I said quietly, "because I needed to understand who destroyed my life." I looked directly into Ayan's eyes. Before I stood in front of them again. No trembling. No shouting. Just truth. And somehow that felt heavier than rage ever could. Security began moving through the ballroom suddenly. Hotel staff whispering into earpieces. Guests stepping aside and... Someone had called authorities. Not me. I looked toward Ayan instinctively. He didn't look surprised at all. Of course he didn't. Because this man prepared for outcomes long before other people imagined them. And as the elevator doors opened near the ballroom entrance, a terrible realization settled into my chest. This wasn't the collapse of his plan. It was only the next stage of it. The first police officer stepped into the ballroom at exactly 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because the giant clock above the hotel bar reflected in the glass behind him. 9:47. Blue emergency lights flickering faintly across the river below. And Ayan, still perfectly calm. That frightened me more than anything else that night. Because innocent people panic when the truth surfaces. Prepared people adjust. The ballroom had divided into invisible sides now. Guests whispering in clusters. Some staring openly at me. Others avoiding eye contact entirely. Nobody wanted to stand too close to scandal until they understood who would survive it. That's how wealthy circles work. Morality arrives after certainty. Two officers approached the stage carefully. Professional. Controlled. But visibly aware something unusual was unfolding. One of them, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and rain on her coat sleeves, looked directly at me first. Not Ayan. Interesting. "Ma'am," she said gently, "we received reports of a disturbance." Before I could answer, Ayan stepped forward smoothly. "My wife is recovering from a traumatic brain injury," he explained softly. There it was. Immediate reframing. Not liar. Not criminal. Caretaker. Protective husband. The officer's posture changed slightly. Not fully convinced, but cautious now. Because society teaches people to trust composed men over emotional women almost automatically. Especially disabled women. Especially traumatized women. Ian had counted on that for years. She's confused, he continued carefully. Recent memory complications have caused paranoia episodes. Paranoia. Interesting upgrade from confusion. The language was escalating strategically now. I watched the female officer closely. She didn't interrupt him. But she also didn't fully accept it. Good. Still thinking. Still observing. Then Martin stepped forward suddenly. No, he said firmly. The entire room tightened again. This is not psychological confusion. There are financial records, altered legal filings. I participated in some of them. Ian's eyes shifted toward him slowly. Hold. Measured up. Not surprised. Never surprised. You should speak with legal counsel before making reckless statements, Ian said calmly. Martin swallowed hard. For a second I thought he might retreat again. But guilt finally outweighed fear. There was pressure after the accident, he continued shakily. From investors tied to the Rahman estate merger. The officers exchanged quick glances now. Real attention. Finally. The female officer turned toward me again. Ma'am, do you believe someone intentionally harmed you? Simple question. Impossible answer. Because how do you explain years of psychological manipulation in one sentence? How do you summarize erosion? Control? Dependence? The gradual replacement of your reality with someone else's version of it? I believe, I said carefully, that my accident financially benefited several people who expected me not to recover fully. The ballroom went quiet again. The officer nodded slowly. Not agreement. Consideration. Then she asked the most important question yet. Do you have evidence beyond the recording? Ian relaxed slightly beside me. But visible. He thought this was the weak point. Maybe it had been once. Not anymore. I reached into my purse again and removed the wedding letter, the original settlement copies, and finally, a small silver flash drive. That got his attention immediately. Real attention. For the first time all night. His composure fractured completely. Just for a second, but enough. What's on that? He asked. Too quickly. The officer noticed too. So did I. I looked directly at him. Something you forgot existed. 3 weeks earlier, after finding the hidden file cabinet, I had returned secretly while Ian attended a conference in Boston. Not to search randomly, to confirm instinct. People like Ian always preserve leverage somewhere. Insurance. Protection. An exit plan. And I was right. Hidden behind old architectural blueprints inside his office wall safe, I found backup archives, private recordings, financial transfers, encrypted copies of conversations he apparently kept to protect himself from his own partners. Control-oriented people rarely trust allies completely. That paranoia became my survival. I made copies, I told the officers calmly. Ian's jaw tightened again. The room watched him carefully, no longer admiring, studying. Huge difference. Inside the flash drive were time-stamped audio files, offshore transfer records, revised medical directives, and one particular document that changed the atmosphere entirely. A signed authorization delaying additional neurological evaluations after my coma. Approved by my husband. Against a specialist's recommendation. The female officer's expression hardened slightly while reviewing the printed summary. Martin handed her. When exactly were these evaluations delayed? She asked. Martin answered quietly. Approximately 8 months. 8 months. 8 months where further memory recovery might have happened earlier. 8 months where my dependency deepened. 8 months where my finances, legal rights, and physical mobility remained under nearly complete supervision. The room no longer looked confused now. It looked disturbed. Good. Let them finally feel disturbed. Then Hira spoke for the first time in almost 15 minutes. Barely above a whisper. I didn't know about the medical delays. Nobody answered her immediately. Because truth inside betrayal arrives unevenly. And everyone was realizing different versions of the story simultaneously. Tears streaked down her face now, ruining the careful makeup she always wore flawlessly. I thought, she stopped breathing for a second. I thought the accident just changed him. Ian finally looked at her directly. And what terrified me most? He looked disappointed. Not remorseful. Disappointed. Like she had failed structurally somehow. She'd go home, Hira. Cold, dismissive. Finished with her. And in that moment, I understood their entire relationship. He never loved vulnerable people. He collected useful ones. The officers requested a private conversation area away from the ballroom. But before we moved, Ian said something that stopped everyone again. You still think this started with the crash? His eyes locked on the mine. But it started long before that. Every instinct inside me sharpened instantly. Because suddenly, he looked almost relieved. Like a man exhausted from carrying one version of reality alone. What does that mean? I asked quietly. A faint smile touched his face. Not warm. Not cruel. Just tired. You were never supposed to sign the merger papers. The sentence landed strangely at first. Then slowly, horribly, it connected. 3 years ago, before the accident, I had postponed signing a major estate consolidation agreement tied to my late father's holdings. I delayed it because something about the investor structure felt wrong. Too rushed, too opaque. Ian had argued with me for weeks over it. Not openly aggressive. Just persistent. You're overthinking. It's standard restructuring. We're losing opportunities. I remember those conversations now with terrifying clarity. Because at the time, I thought we were arguing about business. You stopped the merger, Ian continued quietly. And people panicked. The ballroom felt colder suddenly. You think this was about greed? He asked. It was about survival. I stared at him. Whose survival? That smile again? Thin? Controlled and the kind you don't understand until very dangerous people start losing money. Silence. Even the officers looked uncertain. Because the story had just widened beyond marriage. Beyond betrayal. into something larger. And judging by Ayan's expression, he had spent years carrying fear of someone else too. Then the female officer asked carefully, "Are you implying external parties were involved in the collision?" Ayan looked toward the rain-covered windows for several seconds before answering. And for the first time that night, he seemed genuinely human. Exhausted. Cornered. A man who had crossed too many lines to walk backward anymore. "I'm saying," he replied quietly, "the accident was supposed to scare her." My blood went cold instantly. "Not kill me. Scare me. Then why?" But the driver lost control in the rain. Everything inside me stopped. Because suddenly, the memory fragments changed shape again. The speeding SUV, the bridge, the impact angle, the voice saying she's still breathing. This wasn't a carefully executed assassination. It was a failed intimidation attempt that spiraled into catastrophe. And afterward, instead of helping me, they protected themselves. Hera looked horrified now. "You told me she'd never wake up properly." Ayan didn't answer. Because silence sometimes confirms things words cannot. Then he looked back at me. Long, heavy, and quietly said the sentence that shattered whatever remained of my old life. "The worst thing I ever did." Pause. Was realizing it became easier to keep lying than admit what happened. No one moved. No one spoke. Because suddenly the monster standing in front of us looked painfully real. Not cartoonishly evil. Not explosive. Just weak. Self-protective. Morally collapsing one compromise at a time. And somehow, that felt even darker. But before anyone could respond, one of the officers received a radio call. His expression changed instantly. Sharper. Alert. He turned toward his partner. Then toward Ayan. "There's someone downstairs asking for Mr. Raman." Ayan's face lost color for the first time all night. Real fear. Immediate. Raw. And that's when I realized something terrifying. The people he'd been protecting himself from might finally be here. The change in Ayan's face lasted less than 2 seconds. But I saw it. Everyone did. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely unprepared. Not irritated. Not calculating. Afraid. And suddenly, every version of him I'd memorized over the years rearranged itself in my mind. The charming husband. The careful manipulator. The composed strategist. Underneath all of them, there had always been something else. Pressure. Constant pressure. The officer lowered his radio slowly. "He refused to give his full name," he said, "but he claims Mr. Raman will understand why he's here." The ballroom had gone unnaturally still again. Even the guests near the exit stopped whispering. Because fear changes a room faster than shouting ever can. Ayan recovered quickly. Quickly. "That's not necessary," he said calmly. "I'll handle it privately." "No," the female officer replied immediately. Interesting. She no longer sounded cautious around him. Good. Trust had finally cracked. Then his phone vibrated. Once and sharp against the silence. Looked at the screen. And all the color drained from his face again. I had never seen Ayan frightened before. Concerned? Angry? Quietly. But fear? Never. Until now. What is it? I asked softly. He locked the screen immediately. A bad one this time. Because scared people lose elegance first. The officer stepped closer. Sir, I'm going to need you to remain here while we clarify a few things. Ayan laughed once under his breath. Not amused. Exhausted. Do you think this is still about your investigation? Nobody answered. He looked around the ballroom slowly. At the guests. At the officers. At me. Then toward the rain-covered glass walls overlooking the city. And suddenly, I realized he was calculating exits. Not legal ones. Physical ones. That realization turned my blood cold. Because innocent men don't search rooms for escape routes. Then Hira spoke again. Voice trembling. Who's downstairs? Ayan closed his eyes briefly. Just once. Like a man standing at the edge of collapse. You should leave. That's not an answer. It's the only useful advice I can give you right now. The room shifted again. Fear spreading outward now in quiet waves. Not scandal anymore. Real danger. The elevator chimed softly near the ballroom entrance. Every head turned instinctively. 3 men stepped out. Dark suits. No umbrellas despite the storm outside. 1 older. 2 younger. None of them looked wealthy in the polished, public way people in that ballroom did. They looked operational. Controlled as like men accustomed to being obeyed quickly. The oldest one scanned the room once. Then found Ayan immediately. No surprise. No confusion. Just direct eye contact. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. This meeting had happened before. Maybe many times. The officers moved first. Sir, you can't come through here. The older man handed over a black leather credential wallet. Not police. Not FBI. Something else. The officer's posture changed almost instantly after reading it. Subtle, but enough. The female officer looked toward Ayan again now with entirely different eyes. Not suspicion. Recognition. Or maybe concern. That frightened me even more. The older man approached slowly. Gray hair. Rainwater still clinging to his coat sleeves. His face looked calm in the way deeply dangerous people often do. Not emotional. Not performative. Just efficient. Ayan, he said evenly. No handshake. No greeting. Ayan didn't move. Shouldn't have come here. I warned you this would escalate. His voice remained perfectly level. But every instinct inside me screamed that these men operated in realities ordinary people never fully saw. The ballroom had become silent enough to hear ice shifting inside abandoned champagne glasses. I looked toward Martin. The attorney looked physically ill now. Like he recognized exactly who these men were. And wished desperately that he didn't. The older man finally turned toward me. His eyes settled on the wheelchair first. Then the scars visible near my shoulder. Something unreadable passed across his expression. Not sympathy. assessment of "You survived better than expected," he said calmly. The sentence hollowed the air out of my lungs. Better than expected. Not hoped. Expected. The officer stepped closer immediately. "Sir, I need clarification regarding your involvement here." The older man barely acknowledged them. "This matter exceeds local jurisdiction." That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly the ballroom no longer felt like the scene of a family betrayal. It felt like a room people far more powerful had entered to contain damage. "Ion," the man continued, "you were instructed to stabilize the situation quietly." Stabilize. Same language. Same cold vocabulary. And instead, he glanced briefly toward me, you let emotions complicate the process. I saw Hira physically recoil beside the stage. Because now the truth was becoming uglier than any of us imagined. Not one manipulative husband. Not one corrupted attorney. A network. Systems. Investors of pressure. And somewhere inside all of it, my life had become a logistical problem. I looked directly at Ian. Who are they? For the first time all night. He answered honestly. They represent the people behind the merger. My chest tightened painfully. The estate merger. The documents I refused to sign. The pressure campaigns. The accident. Everything connected now. Not cleanly. Not perfectly. But enough. The older man interrupted quietly. The collision was never authorized to escalate. Authorized a... God! Who talks like that about human lives? I felt suddenly nauseous. You terrorized me for money, I whispered. No, he corrected calmly. We protected financial infrastructure worth billions. Billions. The ballroom reacted visibly to that word. Even wealthy people become uncomfortable around larger predators. And suddenly everyone understood the same thing at once. This situation existed far beyond social scandal. The female officer spoke carefully. If crimes occurred, they'll be investigated through proper channels. The older man looked at her almost kindly. You still believe this entered proper channels years ago? No arrogance. No threat. Just fact. That scared me more than anger would have. Then he looked back at me. Your husband made several catastrophic mistakes after the collision. Mistakes like my ruined spine was an accounting error. He became emotionally compromised. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Emotionally compromised? Ian? The man who controlled every expression for years? But then, I looked at him carefully. Really carefully. And suddenly I saw exhaustion beneath the composure. Years of it. Fear. Pressure. Moral collapse buried beneath performance. Not innocence. Never innocence. But maybe not complete control either. You could have gone to the police, I said quietly. Ian finally looked at me fully. There were no safe versions of that outcome. The terrifying part? I believed him. At least partly. Because some systems are designed specifically to erase people who become inconvenient. And judging by the men standing inside that ballroom, I had accidentally survived becoming inconvenient. Then the older man said something that chilled me deeper than anything else that night. The problem now, he said calmly, too many people have heard this conversation. The room froze. Every guest, every officer, every employee. Still, the younger men near the elevator shifted slightly. Tiny movements, professional movements, and suddenly every survival instinct inside me ignited at once. Because I finally understood the true danger of powerful secrets. It's never the crime itself. It's the cleanup afterward. Ion stepped forward immediately. The older man's gaze moved toward him slowly. You are in no position to negotiate anymore. She was never supposed to be touched again. That sentence hit me harder than shouting ever could. Because buried inside it was another truth. At some point after the crash, Ion had protected me from them. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe fear. Maybe something uglier and more complicated. But somehow, against all logic, the man who helped destroy my life had also spent years preventing someone else from finishing the job. The older man sighed quietly. You've become emotionally irrational. Maybe, Ian replied. Then he looked at me. And for the first time since I met him, his voice sounded completely unguarded. I tried to contain it after the accident. Not excuse. Not defense. Confession. I thought if I kept control of everything, I could stop it from getting worse. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Not forgiveness. Never that. Just the unbearable weight of realizing evil sometimes grows through cowardice instead of hatred. Then one of the younger men touched his earpiece suddenly. The older man's expression shifted instantly. Urgency. Finally. He looked toward the windows overlooking the river. Then toward the officers. We're out of time. And every instinct inside me screamed the same question. Out of time for what? The older man checked his watch once. Precise. Controlled. Then he looked toward the ballroom windows again. Rain had intensified outside, turning the river beyond the glass into black moving oil beneath the city lights. We need to leave, one of the younger men said quietly. Not nervous. Operational. That word echoed painfully inside my head. Leave. As if this entire nightmare was still manageable. Still containable. But something had changed in the room. The illusion of control was collapsing too fast. Guests were quietly recording. Hotel staff had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the officers looked tense in a different way. Not socially tense. Physically tense. Like people sensing danger before understanding its shape. Then the ballroom lights flickered once. Just once. But it was enough. Everyone noticed. The older man closed his eyes briefly. Annoyed. He said calmly. You should have ended this before it became public. That sentence settled heavily across the room. Not because of what it implied. Because of how casually he said it. Like destruction was merely a missed administrative task. No, Ian replied quietly. The older man looked at him carefully. And for the first time, I saw something close to disappointment. Not rage. Not betrayal. Disappointment. Like a valuable employee failing under pressure. You've become a liability. Ian laughed softly under his breath. Probably. The honesty of that answer frightened me more than denial would have. Because exhausted people stop protecting themselves eventually. And exhausted, dangerous people become unpredictable. The female officer stepped forward. Everyone needs to remain where they are. But nobody truly controlled the room anymore. Not the police. Not the investors. Not even Ayan. Fear had grown larger than authority. And fear spreads fast. Then my phone vibrated inside my purse. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But instinct told me not to. When I answered, all I heard at first was static. Then a woman's voice. Low. Urgent. You need to leave the hotel immediately. My pulse froze. Who is this? A nurse from St. Vincent's Rehabilitation Wing. I stopped breathing. I knew that voice. Vaguely. From years ago. The night of your accident, she whispered quickly. Someone paid to restrict access to your recovery floor. Cold rushed through my entire body. I tried reporting irregularities after your coma evaluation. My supervisor buried it. The line crackled violently. Hurry, she said. They know you recovered more memory than expected. Then the call disconnected. I looked up slowly. The older man was watching me now. Not my phone. My face. He knew. Or guessed enough. And suddenly I understood the horrifying scale of this thing. The cover-up hadn't started after the crash. It started inside the hospital. Inside recovery. Inside the years where everyone believed I was too broken to notice. Ayan, I whispered. He looked at me immediately. And somehow, through all the manipulation, all the lies, I knew he understood exactly what I had just learned. His face changed instantly. Real alarm. Not strategic. Human. Who called you? Before I could answer, every light in the ballroom went out. Complete darkness. Gasps exploded across the room. Someone screamed. Glass shattered somewhere near the bar. Then emergency backup lights flooded the ballroom in dim red. The atmosphere transformed instantly. Not elegant anymore. Dangerous. Primal. The younger men near the elevator moved immediately. Fast. Too fast for ordinary security personnel. One positioned near the exits. The other touched his jacket near the waist. Weapon. My entire body went cold. The officers noticed too. Hands moved toward holsters instantly. And suddenly the room crossed an invisible line. This was no longer exposure. No longer scandal. This was survival. Everybody stay calm, one officer shouted. Nobody listened. Guests surged backward. Phones dropped. Furniture overturned. Fear finally became chaos. Then Ayan moved. Not away from me. Toward me. He grabbed the handles of my wheelchair and pulled me backward just as one of the ballroom windows exploded inward. Glass erupted everywhere. People screamed. The sound was deafening. Cold rain blasted into the room through shattered panels. And for one impossible second, I thought we were all about to die. Ayan! Hira screamed somewhere behind us. But he didn't stop moving. He shoved my wheelchair behind an overturned banquet table as another crash echoed through the ballroom. Not gunfire. Smoke canisters. Gray clouds exploded near the stage instantly. People panicked harder. The officers were yelling now. Someone pulled a fire alarm. Red emergency lights flashed wildly through smoke and rain. And in the middle of all that chaos, Ayan crouched directly in front of me. Listen carefully. His voice had changed completely. No performance left. No manipulation. Just urgency. There's a private service elevator behind the kitchen corridor. My heart hammered violently. Come with me. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. After everything? After all the lies? But then he said something that stopped me cold. They're not here to protect themselves anymore. Pause. They're here to erase exposure. The older man's voice echoed through the smoke somewhere nearby. Secure the exits. God! This was really happening. Ayan gripped the side of my wheelchair tightly. You have to trust me for 5 more minutes. Trust. What a cruel word. What an impossible word. And yet, every instinct inside me knew he was telling the truth now. Not because he'd become good, but because the situation had finally become larger than deception. Then suddenly Hira emerged through the smoke, coughing violently. Terrified. Mascara streaked down her face. Anne? He cut her off instantly. Take her through the kitchen. Her eyes widened. What about you? I'll slow them down. The younger sister I had spent months resenting looked at me then. Really looked at me. And in that moment, we both understood the same terrible thing. Whatever existed between her and Ayan, it had never been love. Just survival wrapped in dependency. I can't leave you, she whispered. Ayan almost smiled. Broken. You already stayed too long. Then he looked at me one final time. And beneath the chaos, beneath the betrayal, beneath years of lies, I finally saw the truth. He had loved control more than people, loved fear more than honesty, loved survival more than morality. But somewhere along the way, he had also become trapped inside the very machine he helped build. And now it was consuming him too. Another explosion of glass shattered nearby. The officers were evacuating guests now. Smoke thickened rapidly. The older man disappeared somewhere near the ballroom entrance, barking calm instructions into an earpiece. Operational. Efficient. Emotionless. Like human lives were simply moving pieces across a board. Go! Ayan shouted suddenly. Hera grabbed my wheelchair immediately. We pushed through the kitchen corridor while alarms screamed overhead. Hotel staff were crying. Dishes shattered across floors. Emergency lights painted everything blood red. And behind us, I heard shouting, then fighting, then silence. The service elevator doors finally opened. Hera slammed the button repeatedly with shaking hands. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling somewhere nearby. My heart pounded so violently, I thought I might black out.